There's an old joke, even among Catholics, that the number one export of the Catholic Church is guilt. It's pretty funny, up until the point where you realize just how badly that skewers your perspective of reality. My family was originally pretty moderate. We went to the Novus Ordo Catholic Church. For those who don't know, the Novus Ordo happened in 1968 when Vatican Council Two decided to modernize the church and to ease up on some practices. They no longer said the Mass in Latin, but in the language that was common to whatever local community that they were in. Essentially, they became well-organized, liberal Lutherans with funny hats. This is the church that we went to until I was 10 years old. The years before that, we were pretty active in the church. I was an altar boy. No, I was not molested. My mother volunteered as the priest's housekeeper, and my father volunteered to help with the lawn care. We sat in the front rows of the pews, proudly showing everyone else just how devout we were. We laughed all the time. It was quite common for my father and I to jump in the truck and race my mother and my other siblings to church. Yeah, we were that family. Now, around 9 years old, a change happened. We got a new priest, who was more liberal than the three frail Irish brothers who had served as our parish priest for so many years. Suddenly, I was taken out of altar boy rotation. I don't know the conversations that happened, but I do remember that my mother became more zealous. We had always been ultra-conservative. My sisters wore dresses and veils on their head, and my father, my brothers, and I, we all wore suits and tie to church. We might have been dirt poor, but on Sunday, we sure didn't look it. We went from sitting in the front row of the church to all the way in the back. I guess this signified that my mother was no longer leading the congregation. It was an act of defiance for us, as it was declared that everyone else had become flaky and liberal. Liberal. That was a dirty word in our household. My mother and father no longer volunteered. I doubt anyone missed them. My mother also stopped teaching catechism after church. No doubt her students were thankful for her absence. Eventually, we moved from the back of the church to the cry room that was reserved for women with infants. No one dared argue with my mother over this. My father would disconnect the speakers that carried this service into the cry room, and we would spend the entire time quietly praying. Mostly I was chewing my fingernails, daydreaming, and trying to kick my sisters. I wasn't as successful there. There were several factors that led my family to stop attending the Novus Ordo and begin attending the traditional Latin Mass. A visiting seminarian that was studying to be a priest in the Latin Mass befriended my family. A woman in my mom's knitting circle was already attending the Latin Mass, and of course, my parents were looking. The traditional Latin Mass movement was a response to Vatican II, in which a group of bishops decided that they did not want to follow the modernization that Rome was putting out and continue to have the Mass in Latin and follow the old ways. I like to compare it to Orthodox Jews and modern-day Jews, only way more extreme. We began going to a chapel down the road that was led by the Society of St. Pius X. And the isolation began. I stopped seeing my friends from the Novus Ordo Church. I was no longer allowed to go over to their house or to play with them anymore. My youngest brother's godparents stopped speaking to us entirely, and my mother proclaimed that they were hypocrites anyways. My other brother's godparents we still spoke to, but only because we got milk and eggs from them. But I no longer went and worked on their ranch ever again. When I was pulled out of 4th grade halfway through the school year, I lost all my other friends from the school. My mother tried to homeschool me, but I was very clever and came up with new ways to avoid learning anything from her. I was angry and sad. I begged and pleaded to my parents to send me back to public school, but my mother refused, and my father did as he was told. I never did see most of my friends from that school ever again. I wasn't allowed to leave the yard, and none of the other kids' parents wanted their children around the crazy backward loons my family was quickly being seen as. We became shunned by the community almost as badly as my mother shunned them. My only friend at that time was a cat that I rescued the year I turned 10. An orange tabby kitten I named Bouncer. To this day, I still have a stronger affection for him than most people and most of my family. My mother never grounded us kids. It's slightly difficult to ground someone if you never allow them to go anywhere in the first place. She was constantly talking about the devil and how at any moment we could be snatched up by Satanists and sacrificed to the devil. Or worse, forced to deny Christ. She would read us stories about hell, taken from visions of the saints, in which they described the gruesome and violent tortures that awaited sinners. We were reminded constantly to pray and to avoid sin. We were shown pictures of what hell looked like, and how children, just like us, could easily wind up there for not obeying their parents. And that was the mantra: obey, obey, obey. Always obey your parents. To love meant to obey. And if we did not obey, it meant that we did not love our mother enough. And when my mother took the buckle end of my father's belt to my legs until they welted and bled, it was because she loved me so much that she punished me in order that I would not burn forever in eternal fire. And if she had to kill me in the process, as she used to quip, then by hook or crook, she was going to get me to heaven. But then, even from an early age, I was labeled the problem child and a disgrace to the family. I was told this many times. At one point, my mother even said that evil had been rooted in my heart and Satan had a grasp on my soul. 10 years old was a big year for me. I lost my friends. I lost my community. I lost any respect I had for my mother. My grandfather died that year. It was the last time I ever cried. The last time I cried was when my mother was taking a belt to my legs for sneaking out of the yard. I haven't cried since. Maybe evil did have a root in my heart. Or maybe it was evil radicalism that was beating the fuck out of me. Either way, it never beat the independence out of me.